4 world titles built on one thing, a car that lets him attack with the rear end planted. This year, Red Bull built in the opposite.
36 upgrades in 11 races. Only China went by without something new, bolted onto the car. Mekis didn't dress it up as ambition either. He called it correcting a large deficit they'd known about since round 1. Credit where it's due, it's worked. Over a second off, Mercedes' pace at the start of the year down to a few tenths by the summer break. Most teams would sign up for that kind of turnaround in half a season. Then Verstappen climbs out of the car in Hungary after finishing second and says he doesn't really understand how they got there. Not the usual post-race shrug. He talks about the car being extremely oversteery. Degradation biting hard at one point mid-stint. Damage on the car afterwards nobody could quite explain. You don't hear a driver talk like that when he's happy with the machine underneath him. You hear it when a good result has quietly papered over something that's still broken.
If the car's a second and a half faster than where it started, why does the fastest driver in it still sound this unconvinced?
Worth walking through what Oversteer is doing here, because it matters more for him specifically than it would for most drivers on the grid. The rear axle loses grip before the front does. The car rotates past what the steering wheel asked for and the driver has to catch it with opposite lock before it spins away completely. Understeer runs the other way, front end washes wide, the car just won't turn in. Plenty of drivers can live with either, provided it stays consistent enough to build a picture of where the limit actually sits. What eats lap time is a car that flips between the two inside a single corner, understeer on entry, snap oversteer on exit, sometimes within the same 3 seconds. And that's the pattern Red Bull's own people, not just Verstappen, have described all season. His whole style runs on a stable, trustworthy rear axle. Rotate the car early, get back on the throttle sooner than anyone else, because he trusts what's happening underneath him. Strip that trust away and it isn't comfort he loses. It's the tool his lap time actually comes from. Think about how he built his reputation in the first place. The dominant Red Bulls of 2022 and 2023 weren't just fast in a straight line. They were planted, predictable, the kind of car that let him throw it into a corner half a car length later than his rivals and still trust the rear would hold. That's the driving style that won him 4 titles. This year's car asks him to drive with one hand tied behind his back, guessing what the rear's going to do rather than knowing it. Weight plays a part here too, though it's worth keeping separate from the rest, rather than folding everything into one vague blob of the car's bad. Sources close to the team put the weight problem at roughly 2/10 a lap on its own. A heavier car transfers more load every time it changes direction. Brake hard into a corner and that extra mass pitches forward, unloading the rear right when it needs to be planted for turn-in. Get back on the power at the exit and the load swings backward onto tyres that have already been working harder than the competition's because they've carried more heat through the lap. 2/10 in isolation is nothing to panic about. Stack it against a genuine mechanical fault and the numbers stop being polite. Because there was a mechanical fault sitting underneath all of it. Technical director Pierre Wachet pointed to what he called mechanical gremlins early in the season, a steering system defect that left both Verstappen and Hadjar disconnected from what the car was doing beneath them. Worth pausing on that word, both. This wasn't one driver struggling to adapt while his teammate got on with it fine. 2 very different drivers, different styles, different levels of experience, reporting the same disconnection from the front axle. That's not a driver problem. That's a car problem wearing a driver's complaint as its symptom. A pace deficit you can drive around. Find half a tenth here, a tenth there, through sheer effort across a race weekend. Losing steering feedback doesn't work like that because it strips away the information his hands are supposed to be giving him. For a driver whose entire approach depends on knowing precisely where the limit breaks away, that's the one thing he trusts most, quietly taken off in mid-corner, lap after lap.
If the fix is this well understood by the team, why hasn't Red Bull thrown everything they've got at it?
Money, mostly. And this is where the story stops being purely about a car's handling and starts being about arithmetic. 36 upgrades against a $215 million cost cap isn't free. That figure covers almost everything a team spends on car development, wind tunnel time, CFD hours, the parts themselves, the people designing and manufacturing them. Every session spent chasing this specific balance problem is money that also has to stretch into next year's car, which under the current rules is still built on the same regulatory platform. There's no clean slate coming to bail them out. Meki's more or less admitted as much, saying at some point they need to call time on this year's development and that he expects that call to come earlier than it did last season. Translate that properly and it means the team best equipped to finish fixing Verstappen's exact complaint is about to have less runway to do it, not more, right as they've started closing the very gap that caused all this. Put the season in context, and that gap mattered more than the raw lap time numbers let on. Red Bull haven't gone a full season without winning since 2015. Verstappen hasn't gone winless through a first half of a season since 2017. Meki's didn't try to spin that into anything rosier than it is, saying the team doesn't sign up for anything other than winning races and refusing to call the current position satisfying, even with 3 podiums arriving since Verstappen's first rostrum of the year back in Canada. Someone drawing a very clear line between being competitive again and actually being finished, and admitting out loud which side of that line they're still standing on. This is where the story stops being about lap times at all, really. Verstappen's contract reportedly carries an exit clause tied to being inside the top 2 of the championship at the summer break. He's 6th, 110 points off Antonelli at the top. The rumour mill hasn't exactly gone quiet either. McLaren links keep resurfacing, and Toto Wolff hasn't ruled out pairing him with Antonelli at Mercedes down the line, which tells you Wolff, at minimum, thinks the door's worth leaving open. David Coulthard, who still flies with Verstappen around the calendar most race weekends and is about as close to the inner circle as an outsider gets, reckons his gut says Verstappen stays. Back-to-back podiums, the years already invested in this project, that's his reasoning. Fair enough, and probably the more likely outcome if you had to put money on it today. But notice what that read actually leans on. Not history on its own, not sentiment on its own, performance. Continuing to trend upward rather than just holding where it is now.
And that's really the tension sitting underneath this whole story.
The oversteer isn't some throwaway complaint Verstappen's airing for the cameras after a decent finish. It's a direct mechanical clash with the exact trait that made him a 4-time champion, and the data from inside the team backs that up rather than just his mood after climbing out of the car. The weight and the steering fault explain a real chunk of where that imbalance is coming from, in tenths rather than guesswork. The cost cap means finishing that fix properly is running into a hard financial ceiling at almost precisely the moment his own contract situation depends on results continuing to improve rather than plateauing at competitive for a podium on a good day. I don't think he's walking away from Red Bull this winter. Coulthard's probably right that there's no Hamilton-style shock waiting over the summer break, but probably stays and the underlying problem is solved are 2 very different claims, and right now only one of them has real evidence sitting behind it.
Does Zandvoort settle this one way or another? Or is this still being written well into next season? Tell me where you'd put your money down in the comments.